For this video, I'd like to talk about the point-slope form for the equations of lines. And point-slope form is really useful when you are given a point and you know the slope. So if you know a point, let's call it x1, comma y1, and you know the slope, we'll just call it m. Then the point-slope form of a line essentially looks like this. You have y minus y1 is equal to m times x minus x1. So let me quickly look at an example and then I'll show you where this comes from. So let's say we're given the point 2, 1, and we're given the slope is 3. And so basically you're just going to plug these in. So anywhere you see y1, you'll replace it with 1. And anywhere you see x1, you'll replace it with 2. And then anywhere you see an m, you replace it with 3. So when we actually plug all these in, we get y minus y1, which is 1, equals m, which is 3, times x minus x1, which is 2. And essentially, given this point and the slope, we now have an equation relating the equation of this line. And what you can do from here is actually change it to slope-intercept form if you were to want to graph it. Remember, slope-intercept form is just y equals mx plus b, where you're effectively solving for y so that you can use the slope and the y-intercept to quickly graph it. But to change it to that form, you essentially just distribute here. And so you get y minus 1 equals 3x minus 6, and then just move the 1 to the other side. So add 1 on each side, and you get y equals 3x minus 5. So this example shows that when you're given a point and you also are given the slope, from that you can figure out the equation for that line. And so you might be wondering, where does this point-slope form come from? It makes a lot of sense that this form works. So it actually comes from the formula for the slope when you're given 2 points. So you might remember that slope, which we usually denote with m, is defined as the rise divided by the run, or in other words, it's the change in the y values divided by the change in the x values. But if you've seen the formula for slope when you have 2 points, it's also written as y2 minus y1 over x2 minus x1. And it's from this formula that we can derive the point slope. So I'm just going to rewrite that. Let's say you have m equals y2 minus y1 over x2 minus x1. Now, this formula is useful when you know 2 points. When you have the points x1, y1 and x2, y2. But now we're going to assume that we actually only know one of these. And the other we're just going to leave very general. Instead of calling it x2, y2 as if we specifically knew those points, now we're just going to call it x and y. Because we don't know these points, this is just going to be the x and y values that can represent any points on the line. So if we replace x2, y2 with just the more general x and y where we don't know those specific points, then from that we have that m is y minus y1 over x minus x1. And from here, we basically just multiply each side of the equation by this denominator, x minus x1. And so when we do that, let me do it over here, we have that x minus x1 times by m equals y minus y1 over x minus x1. And we're going to multiply the right side also by x minus x1. And when we do that, these denominators cancel right here because something divided by itself is always 1. And I'll just rewrite the order, but basically you get y minus y1. And then on this side, I'll write the m first, because that's how it's typically done, and then times x minus x1. So that's where your point-slope equation comes from. It just comes, or it derives from, the formula for finding the slope when you have 2 different points. So once you have the formula, and frankly, you should know where this derives from. All right, in fact, anytime you use a formula, it's important that you understand where the formula comes from. If you just memorize the formulas, that might work in the short term, but long term, memorizing is not the best strategy to learn math. There's simply just too many things to memorize, and eventually you're going to hit a wall. And it's just better if you understand things from basic principles. So if you understand that this comes from the slope formula and you're able to rederive it, you're much more likely to remember it, and you just understand things on a deeper level. So with all of that in mind, let's start doing some example problems. And the exercises from the Khan Academy are a little bit strange, and maybe not your typical point slope problems. So the one I did in the beginning where you're just given a point and the slope, that's, I would say, a little bit more typical for when you would want to use these. But these exercises will help you get some familiarity just dealing with equations of lines, finding the slope here first, and then using point slope to write the rest of it. So notice with this question, we have to complete the point slope equation of the line through these two different points. So like I said, you usually use point slope when you're given 1 point and the slope. But in this case, we're given these 2 points and we don't know the slope yet. So that's going to be our first step. So step number 1, find the slope. And to do that, we'll use the slope formula when we have 2 points. So y2 minus y1 over x2 minus x1. And when we do this, so I'm just going to plug things in now. We'll do this as y2 and x2. So that makes this y1 and x1. So y2 is 4. We replace that with 4. And y1 is 2. x2 is 7. And x1 would be 2. And actually, I just realized y1 is 3, not 2. So that's not correct. So just double checking. y2 is 4. y1 is the y value on this one. That's 3. x2 is 7. And x1 is 2. And with that, we can figure out the slope. 4 minus 3 is 1. And 7 minus 2 is 5. So our slope is 1/5. And now we can use the point slope equation. So let me just rewrite it. Y minus y1 equals m times x minus x1. And it looks like they've already chosen y1 for us. In fact, I named these, I guess, incorrectly. It worked for the slope formula, but now I'm going to rename these. So this one, because we use minus 4 here for this equation, and we have y minus y1 and 4 must be the same thing. So in this case, y1 is 4, which means x1 is 7. So in our point slope equation, we're going to put in 7 for this. So we have that y minus 4, that's our y1. And so that tells us we're using this point. And then we have m, which is 1/5 times x minus x1. And since we used the y value of 4, we have to use the x value of 7. We have to use this point. You can't use a y value of 4 and then choose this x value from the other point. So we have x minus 7. And this is actually it. You'd be able to stop here. So in the box, you would just write 1/5 times x minus 7 when you actually do the exercise on Khan Academy.